I am 36 years old now, but the story I'm about to tell you started when I was 16. That was the year my parents decided I no longer existed. Not metaphorically, not emotionally, legally, practically, completely. One night I was their daughter. The next morning I was a problem they erased. And for 20 years there was no contact, no phone calls, no birthdays, no holidays, no questions about whether I was alive or dead. Nothing. Until 3 months ago, when my doorbell rang at exactly 6:42 in the evening, and standing on my porch were the same two people who once told me very calmly that I was no longer their child. My mother was wearing pearls. My father stood behind her with his hands folded, the way he always did when he wanted to look reasonable. They did not ask how I was. They did not apologize. They did not even say my name. The first thing my father said was this: "We would like to meet our grandson." I remember blinking once, then twice, because I did not understand the sentence. I do not have a son. I never have. And they knew that, or at least they should have. But as I would soon learn, facts were not what brought them back to my life after 2 decades of silence. I am telling you this now because what happened next changed how I understand family, truth, and silence. And because some of you watching this might be living with a version of this story yourself. Let me take you back to the beginning. When I was 16, I was a straight-A student, honor roll, debate team, college brochures already arriving in the mail. My parents loved telling people about me, especially my father. He worked in finance. Reputation mattered to him more than comfort, more than kindness, more than me. My mother followed his lead in everything. She used to say that a family is only as respectable as what the neighbors believe. At 16, I believed that love would be enough to protect me. I was wrong. I found out I was pregnant during midterms. I remember sitting on the edge of my bed, staring at the test in my hands, thinking that my life had just split into a before and an after. I waited 3 days before telling my parents. 3 days of not sleeping. 3 days of rehearsing sentences in my head that never came out the way I planned. When I finally told them, my father did not raise his voice. That was worse. He asked questions like he was conducting an interview. Who is the father? What does his family do? Does he plan to take responsibility? Do you understand what this looks like? My mother cried quietly but did not touch me. Not once. That night, they told me I had 2 options: leave the house immediately or stay, but give the baby up and pretend none of this ever happened. I chose the baby. By 9:15 that night, my suitcase was on the floor by the front door. By 9:20, my father handed me an envelope. Inside was a letter. It stated that by choosing this path, I forfeited all claims to financial support, inheritance, and family association. It was notarized. I was 16 years old, and my parents had already prepared paperwork for my disappearance. When I stepped outside, my mother did not follow me. She did not call my name. The door closed behind me. That sound stayed with me longer than any argument ever could. After that night, I did not exist to them. No calls when I graduated high school, no messages when I gave birth, no acknowledgement that they had a grandchild, which is why what happened 20 years later made no sense at all. When they stood on my porch asking to meet a grandson, I felt something cold move through my chest. Not anger, not sadness, recognition. They were not there for me. They were not there for the child I raised alone. They were there for something else, something they needed, something they wanted to show. Because here's the truth. I never had a son. I had a daughter. And she was inside the house, listening to every word. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. If someone who erased you from their life for 20 years suddenly showed up asking for access to your child, what would you do? Comment the number 1 if you think blood does not excuse abandonment. This is only the beginning. In the next part, I will tell you why my parents suddenly needed a grandson that did not exist, and what they were willing to offer in return. Make sure you stay with me. When my parents stood on my porch asking for a grandson, it forced me to look backward. Not because I missed them, but because everything they were doing now was rooted in who they had always been. My family was built on appearances, not love, not safety. Appearances. My father believed reputation was a currency. He believed it could open doors, close mouths, and erase mistakes. And in his world, mistakes were not things you fixed. They were things you buried. From the outside, we looked perfect. Two-story house, manicured lawn, holiday cards with forced smiles. Inside, there were rules. Do not embarrass the family. Do not speak about problems. Do not disappoint your father. I learned those rules early, which is why I kept my first love a secret. He was a boy from my school, kind, quiet, unremarkable in the ways my parents valued. He did not come from the right family. He did not have the right last name. So I never brought him home. We met between classes, studied together, talked about futures that felt very far away. For the first time, I felt seen. And when I found out I was pregnant, that feeling disappeared instantly. I did not cry at first. I sat very still, because I knew something before I knew anything else. My parents would not see a scared 16-year-old girl. They would see a scandal. When I finally told them, I chose my words carefully. I said I needed help. I said I was afraid. I said I was still their daughter. My father listened without interrupting. Then he leaned back in his chair and asked the first question. Who is responsible for this? Not who hurt you, not are you okay. Responsible. I told them his name. My mother asked what his parents did for a living. My father asked if he planned to marry me. Then he asked how quickly this could be fixed. When I said I was keeping the baby, the room went quiet. Not shocked quiet, calculating quiet. My father stood up and walked to the window. My mother stared at the floor. I realized then that this conversation was not about me. It was about damage control. They told me what this pregnancy would do to the family, what people would say, what my father's colleagues would think, what my future would look like if this got out. They did not ask what I wanted. They told me what I had already lost. By the end of the night, I understood the truth. In their eyes, I had already chosen something over them, and they could not forgive that. They gave me a choice that was never really a choice. Erase the baby and stay, or keep the baby and leave. I remember standing there, my hands shaking, thinking about the life growing inside me, and I knew I could not make that choice for anyone but myself. When I said I was leaving, my mother finally looked up. She asked if I understood what this meant. I said yes. She nodded once. That was it. There was no yelling, no dramatic goodbye, just procedure. My father went to his office and returned with documents already prepared. That was the part that hurt the most. They had planned for this. The letter stated that I was choosing independence and therefore relinquishing all claims to family support and inheritance. It used words like voluntarily and irrevocably. I was 16. I signed nothing. I did not have to. They had already decided. By the time I packed my clothes, it was dark outside. I remember checking the clock because I wanted to remember the exact moment my life changed. 9:15. When I walked out the door, I waited. I waited for my mother to stop me, to hug me, to say we would figure this out. She did not. The door closed, and that was the sound of my childhood ending. After that night, I learned what survival actually meant. I finished high school while working nights. I slept on couches. I learned how to be invisible. When my daughter was born, I held her and promised her something I had never been given. I promised she would never have to earn my love. For 19 years, my parents kept their promise too. The promise of silence, no cards, no inquiries, no attempts to reconnect. They built their lives as if I had never existed. Which is why their sudden interest in a grandson made everything feel wrong. They had not returned because they regretted abandoning me. They returned because something in their carefully constructed image required a child, a male child, something they could display, something they could control. And now that you understand where I came from, you need to understand this. When people show you who they are the first time, believe them. My parents showed me exactly who they were when they chose reputation over their own daughter. What they were doing now was not a change. It was a continuation. In the next part, I will tell you what they really wanted from me and why the timing of their return was no accident at all. This story is far from over. After the door closed behind me that night, there was no dramatic moment where I suddenly became strong. There was only survival. The kind that happens quietly. The kind no one applauds. I finished high school while sleeping wherever I could. Friends' couches, spare rooms. Once, the backseat of a car for 3 nights. I worked evenings, cleaned offices, served tables, took any shift I could get. I learned how to stretch $1 until it felt like it might tear. When my daughter was born, everything narrowed. The world became smaller and sharper. Her name was Lily. She was small and loud and perfect. And the first thing I felt was fear. Not of her, of failing her. I had no parents to call. No one to ask how to do this. No one waiting in a hospital hallway. It was just me and this tiny person who trusted me completely. I held her and made a promise I had no idea how to keep. I promised her she would never feel unwanted. I promised her she would never wonder why she was not enough. Those promises became my compass. The first years were the hardest. I worked days and nights. Sometimes I slept in 30-minute pieces. Sometimes I cried in the bathroom so Lily would not hear me. I learned to move through exhaustion like it was a second language. There were moments I almost called my parents. Not because I missed them, because I needed help. But every time I reached that edge, I remembered the envelope, the notarized letter, the sound of the door closing, and I stopped. We built a life inch by inch. I went back to school when Lily was old enough to sleep through the night. I studied while she colored beside me. I took online classes, night classes, anything that moved me forward. There was no backup plan. Failure was not an option. Not because I was strong, but because she needed me to be. Years passed. Slowly, things changed. I found steady work, then better work, then work that paid enough to breathe. I learned how to budget, how to plan, how to say no to things that did not serve us. I learned how to be both gentle and firm. Lily grew into herself. She was curious, observant, honest in a way that made adults uncomfortable. She asked questions, real questions. Why do some people have grandparents and I do not? Why do you never talk about your parents? I never lied to her. I told her the truth in pieces she could carry. That sometimes adults choose wrong. That sometimes love fails. That none of it was her fault. And she accepted that with a maturity that broke my heart and healed it at the same time. As my life stabilized, I started saving things. Not money. Evidence. The letter my parents gave me. Medical records. School transcripts. Photos of Lily as a baby. Every proof that we existed. That we survived. I did not know why I kept them. Only that something inside me refused to let the past disappear completely. By my early 30s, my life looked unrecognizable from where it started. I had a career I built myself. Not flashy, but solid. I owned my time. I owned my choices. Lily was thriving, smart, independent, unafraid to speak, and most importantly, safe. For years, my parents remained a closed chapter. No attempts to reconnect, no apologies, no curiosity, which meant that when they suddenly appeared again, it did not feel like reconciliation. It felt like an intrusion. Because here's the thing people do not talk about. When you abandon someone long enough, you lose the right to surprise them. My parents did not return because they missed us. They returned because their version of reality needed a missing piece. And that piece was a child, a male one. But Lily was not invisible. She was 19 when my parents came back. Old enough to understand everything. Old enough to remember the silences. Old enough to decide for herself what family meant. She stood in the hallway listening while my parents talked about grandchildren as if they were accessories. I could see something shift in her. Not anger. Clarity. That night, after my parents left, Lily asked one question. Why now? I did not have an answer yet, but I knew one thing. Whatever they wanted, it had nothing to do with love. Because love does not disappear for 20 years and then knock politely. Love does not come with conditions. Love does not ask for proof of usefulness. What they wanted was something they believed they could take. And they were wrong. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. If someone who never helped you survive suddenly wanted credit for your success, what would you do? Comment the number 1 if you believe no one is entitled to a relationship they did not earn. In the next part, I will tell you why my parents suddenly needed a grandson and what they offered me to get him. This is where everything changes. After the night Lily asked why now, the answer arrived sooner than I expected. It came in the form of a knock on my door. Not a phone call, not a letter, a physical presence. 20 years after they erased me from their lives, my parents stood outside my home. Older, carefully dressed, uncertain in a way I had never seen before. My mother smiled first, the same practiced smile she used at school events and charity dinners. My father stood slightly behind her, hands folded, eyes scanning the house as if taking inventory. They said my name. That alone felt strange. as if it had not been spoken by them in decades. They told me they had been in the area. They said they had thought about me often. They said they were proud of what I had become. Every sentence felt polished. None of them felt real. I invited them in because I needed to see this through. They looked around my living room with quiet surprise. The framed photos, the books, the evidence of a life built without them. My mother commented on how nice everything looked. My father nodded approvingly. Neither of them mentioned the years they were absent. Neither of them asked how we survived. They asked about Lily, how old she was, what she studied, what she planned to do next. There was an intensity in their curiosity that made me uncomfortable. They stayed for less than 30 minutes, long enough to establish contact, short enough to avoid accountability. Before leaving, my mother hugged me. It was brief, careful, like she was afraid I might disappear again. 2 days later, my father called. He asked if we could talk privately. We met again, this time without Lily. He chose a restaurant that suggested discretion, quiet, neutral, expensive. My mother joined us later. They spoke about time, about regret, about how life rarely turns out as planned. They apologized, but the apology had no weight. It floated above the table without landing anywhere specific. They never said the words "you abandoned me." They never said we were wrong. They never said we are sorry for the night we sent you away. Instead, they said things like we wish things had been different, and we did what we thought was best. I listened. I waited. Eventually, I asked the question Lily had asked. Why now? My father hesitated. My mother looked at her hands. Then the truth emerged, piece by piece. They were preparing for a celebration, their 50th wedding anniversary, a large formal event. Friends from work, community leaders, extended family, people who had watched their marriage and their image for decades. They wanted the evening to reflect success, stability, legacy. They wanted their family to look complete. And that was when the conversation shifted. They talked about grandchildren, about how people expect to see the next generation, about how questions can arise when things look incomplete. My father said the word grandson, slowly, deliberately, as if it carried more weight than any other word. I told them again that I did not have a son. My father responded without hesitation. He said that was not a problem. He said perception was flexible. He said what matters is what people believe they see. Then he explained their idea. They wanted Lily to attend the anniversary as their grandson. Introduced carefully, dressed in a way that avoided questions. There would be no photos afterward, no follow-up, just one evening, one appearance, enough to close the gap in their story. They framed it as harmless, temporary. They said Lily would not even have to speak. They said it would not affect her life. Then my father named the amount, $250,000, paid in full, no taxes, no paperwork, for one night. I felt something settle inside me at that moment. Not shock, not anger. Clarity. They were not asking for forgiveness. They were offering a transaction. They wanted to purchase silence. They wanted to buy a version of reality where their choices had no consequences. I asked them what would happen afterward. My father said this would be the end of it. No further expectations. No ongoing relationship unless I wanted one. That last part sounded optional, conditional, like everything else they had ever offered. When I returned home, Lily was waiting. She could see it on my face before I said a word. I explained everything. Slowly, carefully. I watched her process each sentence. She did not cry. She did not ask for time. She said one thing. They do not want me. They want proof. That was when I knew exactly what this was. My parents were not back because they had changed. They were back because their story had a hole in it, and they believed I could fill it. That night, I opened the box I had kept for years. The letter, the documents, the proof of what they had done. I realized then that this moment was not random. It was the inevitable collision between truth and image. They thought money would tip the scale. They did not understand that the scale had already moved. I was no longer the frightened girl they sent away. I was not dependent on them. I was not invisible. And Lily was not something to be borrowed. She was my daughter. And I would not let her be erased the way I was. When my parents left that restaurant, they believed I was considering their offer. They believed they had leverage. What they did not realize was that they had given me something far more valuable than money. They had shown me exactly who they still were, and that made what came next inevitable. In the next part, I will explain how I prepared for the anniversary and why the story they planned to present did not survive the night. This was only the beginning of the reckoning. After my parents left that restaurant, something shifted inside me. Not emotionally, strategically. For the first time, I stopped asking why they were the way they were and started paying attention to what they were actually doing. Because once you stop expecting people to change, their behavior becomes very clear. In the days that followed, my parents called more often. They checked in. They asked if I had thought about their offer. They spoke carefully, as if afraid of saying the wrong thing. But beneath every sentence was the same assumption, that I needed them, that money would outweigh memory, that silence could be purchased, and that Lily was not a person. She was a solution. That realization was the turning point. They never asked what Lily wanted. They never asked who she was. They never asked if she was comfortable. They asked how she could help. They asked how she could be presented. They asked how questions could be avoided. That told me everything I needed to know. This was not about reconnecting with a daughter. This was about repairing an image. They had spent decades crafting a version of themselves that did not include failure, and I was the failure they buried. Now that version was incomplete, and they wanted me to fix it. One evening, Lily asked if she could speak to them directly. Not later. Not at the party. Now I did not push her. I did not protect her from the conversation, because she was 19, and because she deserved agency. I arranged a meeting at our home. Neutral ground. My parents arrived with smiles again, with politeness, with an air of control they assumed still worked. They sat on the couch. Lily sat across from them. She introduced herself, not as their grandchild, as herself. They looked at her with curiosity, but not warmth. My mother commented on how grown she looked. My father asked about her studies. Then Lily asked a question they were not prepared for. "Why do you want me?" The room went quiet. My parents exchanged a glance. My father answered first. He said family is important. He said legacy matters. He said it would mean a lot to them. Lily did not interrupt. She listened. Then she asked another question. "Why do you need me to pretend to be someone I am not?" That was when the mask slipped. My father sighed. He leaned back. He said that sometimes details are less important than the overall picture. He said that people do not need to know everything. He said that it was just for one night. That was when Lily spoke clearly. "I am not a grandson. I am not a prop. I am your grandchild. And you did not want me when I was real." Silence followed, heavy, unavoidable. My mother tried to explain. She said they had different priorities back then. She said they did what they thought was best. Lily responded calmly. What was best for who? That question landed, because there was no good answer. They had no explanation that did not center themselves. And Lily saw that immediately. She continued, "You are not asking to know me. You are asking to use me. And I will not help you pretend you did not abandon my mother." My father looked uncomfortable, not guilty, uncomfortable, as if this conversation was not going according to plan. He said Lily was being dramatic. He said they were offering opportunity. That was when Lily said the words that ended it. "If you needed a grandson, you should have treated your daughter better." There was no shouting, no raised voices, just truth. My parents stood up shortly after. They said they needed time to think. They said this was not what they expected. That was the point. They had expected compliance. They had expected gratitude. They had expected control. They did not expect to be confronted by the consequences of their choices. After they left, Lily and I sat at the table in silence. Then she asked me something that surprised me. "Why did you keep everything? The documents? The letter? The proof?" I told her the truth. Because I did not trust the world to remember me. Because I knew one day someone might question my version of events. Because silence benefits the people who caused harm. And Lily nodded. She understood. That night, I made a decision. Not out of anger, out of clarity. I would not negotiate my truth. I would not help them rewrite history. And I would not allow my daughter to be erased the way I was. My parents thought their offer revealed generosity. What it actually revealed was their motivation. They did not care about grandchildren. They cared about perception. They did not care about healing. They cared about appearances. And once you see that, there is no going back. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. If someone only values you when you are useful to their image, What would you do? Comment the number 1 if you believe love without accountability is not love at all. In the next part, I will tell you what I did with the evidence I had kept for years and how preparation became power. Because when people build their lives on lies, truth does not need permission to enter. It only needs the right moment. After that conversation, I stopped hoping for a different ending. Hope was no longer useful. Clarity was. I did not argue with my parents again. I did not explain myself further. I did not try to change their minds. Instead, I decided not to be silent. Silence had already cost me 20 years. What I needed now was preparation, because when people build their lives on appearances, the truth does not destroy them randomly. It destroys them precisely. I started by opening the box I had kept hidden for years, not hidden out of shame, hidden out of instinct. Inside were documents I had never shown anyone. The notarized letter my parents gave me the night they sent me away. It spelled everything out in cold language. That by choosing my child, I forfeited all claims to family support and inheritance. That I was no longer considered dependent. That the separation was permanent. I read it again slowly, not with pain, with focus, because this letter proved something important. They did not forget me. They formally erased me. Next were old records, hospital paperwork from the night Lily was born, forms that listed no emergency contact, no family, only me. School records showing address changes, proof of instability that did not come from irresponsibility, but from abandonment. Then there was the video. A neighbor from my old street had installed a security camera years ago. At the time, it was just new technology, something people talked about casually. But that night, it recorded everything. The suitcase by the door, me stepping outside, the door closing, the timestamp burned into the footage. I had asked for the copy years later, not knowing why, just knowing I needed it. I also reached out to people who remembered, teachers, a guidance counselor, a family friend who had tried to intervene back then and was told to stay out of it. They remembered. They were willing to confirm what happened. I did not need their anger. I needed their memory. I organized everything, chronologically, carefully, not emotionally. This was not about revenge. It was about accuracy. Lily watched me work. She did not ask questions. She understood what this was. Preparation is quiet. It does not look dramatic. It looks like sorting papers at a kitchen table. It looks like making copies. It looks like checking dates twice. While I prepared, my parents continued theirs. They sent invitations. They booked a venue. They talked openly about the anniversary. They assumed compliance. They assumed silence. They assumed I would protect them the way I once tried to protect myself. They were wrong. The place they valued most was not their home, not their marriage, not even their reputation at work. It was public validation, a room full of people who believed their story. That was where they felt safest. That was where truth would be most disruptive. I decided that if the story was going to be told, it would be told there, not online, not through whispers, in the same room where they planned to celebrate 50 years of perfection. I did not announce my intentions. I did not threaten. I did not negotiate. I simply accepted the invitation. That alone surprised them. They took my silence as agreement. They mistook calm for surrender. In the weeks leading up to the event, my parents called often. They asked if everything was settled. They asked what Lily would wear. They asked how she should be introduced. I answered vaguely. I said we would be there. That was all. Lily made her own decision during that time. She chose what she would say, not what I would say for her. Because this was not only my story, it was hers too. The night before the anniversary, I slept better than I had in years. Not because I was relaxed, because I was resolved. When you stop being afraid of losing people who never protected you, something shifts. The day of the event arrived quietly. The venue was elegant, exactly what my parents wanted. A place built for appearances. We arrived early. I carried a small folder. Nothing dramatic, just paper. Truth does not need theatrics. I watched my parents greet guests, laugh, accept compliments, perform. They did not look at me the same way they looked at everyone else. There was caution there, uncertainty. They sensed something, but they could not name it. And then the moment came. The microphone. The attention. The room full of people who believed they knew the story. I did not interrupt. I waited. Because preparation teaches patience. I waited until silence was expected, until everyone was listening. That was when I stood. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I spoke clearly. I said my name. I said who I was. I said I was their daughter. The one they sent away at 16. The one they erased. The room changed. Confusion first, then recognition. I held up the letter. I described the night. I referenced the date, the time. I showed proof, not opinion. Proof. I did not embellish. I did not dramatize. I let facts do what they do best. My parents did not interrupt. They could not, because interruption only draws attention, and attention was no longer theirs to control. Lily stood beside me. She introduced herself as a granddaughter who was never acknowledged, as a person, not a role. She said she would not participate in a lie. And that was enough. Truth does not need to be long. It needs to be undeniable. When we finished, we left. We did not stay for reactions. We did not argue. We did not explain further. Because preparation is about knowing when to stop. The reckoning had begun, and it did not belong to us anymore. In the next part, I will tell you what happened after the truth entered the room, and how consequences arrived without us having to chase them. This story has reached the point where silence is no longer possible. When the truth entered the room, it did not explode. It settled, slowly, heavily. The anniversary celebration my parents had planned so carefully was everything they wanted it to be. Over 200 guests, colleagues, friends, distant relatives, community figures, people dressed for celebration, not confrontation. A live stream camera positioned near the stage so those who could not attend could still witness the moment. The room was built for applause, for speeches, for carefully curated memories. My parents stood at the center of it all, smiling, relaxed, certain of the story they believed they controlled. When my father finished his opening remarks about gratitude and longevity, there was applause, long, warm, then silence followed, the kind that invites the next speaker. That was when I stood up. I did not rush. I did not hesitate. I walked forward calmly. Each step felt steady, not because I was fearless, but because fear had already done its worst to me years ago. The host looked confused when I approached the stage. My father recognized what was happening a second too late. I took the microphone. The sound echoed slightly as I spoke. I said my name. I said I was their daughter, not the one mentioned in speeches, the one never mentioned at all. A ripple moved through the room. Curiosity, confusion, recognition for some. I spoke clearly. I said I was 16 when I was told to leave my parents' home because I was pregnant. I said I was handed a notarized letter that same night stating I was no longer part of the family. I said I left with one suitcase, and that for 20 years there was no contact, no reconciliation, no acknowledgement. I did not raise my voice. I did not accuse. I stated facts, dates, times, details. I said that recently my parents had returned to my life, not out of regret, but out of need. I said they had asked for a grandson that did not exist, because I never had a son. I had a daughter. She stood beside me, 19 years old, present, real. I said they wanted her to pretend to be someone else, to complete an image, to protect a reputation. I held up the letter. I explained what it was. I described the language. I described what it meant to receive that document at 16. The room was completely silent now. Even the live stream comments stopped scrolling for a moment. I then referenced the footage. I did not play it. I did not need to. I described it, the suitcase, the door, the timestamp. Truth does not require spectacle, only consistency. My parents did not interrupt. They did not deny. They could not, because denial would require an alternate story, and they had none. The image they had built for 50 years cracked in real time, not because I attacked it, but because it could not survive the presence of facts. I handed the microphone to Lily. She did not rehearse. She did not hesitate. She said she was not ashamed of who she was. She said she would not be erased to make others comfortable. She said she deserved grandparents who wanted her, not an image of her. She said she would not participate in a lie. That was the moment the illusion collapsed. Not loudly, but completely. Some guests looked away. Some looked at my parents. Some looked at us with understanding. The live stream resumed. Comments appeared. Questions. Shock. Support. My parents stood frozen. Their perfect moment had been replaced by accountability. We did not wait for responses. We did not wait for apologies. We did not wait for outrage. We walked away, because the purpose was never to argue. It was to tell the truth where it mattered most. By the time we reached the parking lot, my phone was vibrating. messages, missed calls. I did not answer. The story no longer belonged to me alone. It belonged to everyone who had witnessed it. The next morning, the consequences began. People talked. The video circulated. Questions were asked. Explanations were demanded. My parents were forced to confront something they had avoided for decades. Reality. Not the one they curated, the one they created. Lily and I sat at the kitchen table, drinking coffee like it was any other day. No celebration, no regret, just relief. Because when the truth is spoken fully, there is nothing left to defend. I did not feel victorious. I felt finished. That chapter closed not with revenge, but with clarity. Before I continue, I want to ask you something. If you had the chance to tell the truth in the one place it could no longer be ignored, would you take it? Comment the number 1 if you believe silence protects the wrong people. In the final part, I will tell you what happened after the event, what changed, and what I chose to do next. Because telling the truth is not the end of the story. It is the beginning of living without fear. We did not stay to see how people reacted. We did not wait for explanations. We did not wait for apologies. When we walked out of that venue, something important happened. The story stopped belonging to my parents, and it stopped belonging to me. It became public. Inside the room we had left behind, confusion settled first. Guests stood in small groups, speaking in lowered voices. Some replayed the moment in their heads. Some checked their phones. Some looked at my parents, waiting for direction. But direction never came. Because there was no script for this. The celebration that was meant to honor 50 years of perfection had fractured in minutes. People who had known my parents for decades were suddenly questioning memories, past conversations, casual assumptions. The narrative they had accepted without thinking now felt unstable, and instability spreads quickly. The live stream ended shortly after we left, but it did not disappear. Clips circulated. People shared the moment, not because it was dramatic, but because it was undeniable. There were no raised voices, no accusations that could be dismissed as emotional, only facts, only documentation, only a daughter and a granddaughter standing in the same room where they were erased. Online, reactions multiplied. Strangers debated. Some defended my parents, some condemned them. Most simply asked how something like this could be hidden for so long. That question mattered, because silence requires cooperation, and that cooperation had finally ended. Within days, people my parents respected began asking questions. Colleagues, old friends, extended family members who had never known I existed. My parents tried to regain control. They issued vague explanations. They spoke about private family matters. They asked for understanding. But explanations without accountability sound hollow, especially when contrasted with evidence, especially when there is video. The image they had protected for decades did not shatter because I exposed it. It shattered because it could not withstand reality. Meanwhile, Lily and I returned to our lives. We went grocery shopping, she went back to her classes, I returned to work. We did not celebrate, we did not mourn, we simply continued. Because closure does not always feel dramatic. Sometimes it feels quiet. My parents attempted to contact me several times. Messages asking to talk, messages asking to explain, messages asking to fix things. I did not respond. Not out of cruelty, out of finality. They had 20 years to speak. They chose silence then. They did not get to choose timing now. Some people asked if I regretted doing it publicly, if I wished I had handled it privately. I always gave the same answer. What they did was private. What they asked me to do was public. They wanted a public lie. They received a public truth. Lily was asked questions too. By friends, by classmates. She answered simply. She said she chose honesty. She said she chose not to disappear. That was enough. The hardest part of all of this was not the fallout. It was the realization that some people will always prioritize image over integrity, even when confronted with proof, even when faced with consequences. But that realization came with something else. Freedom. Because once you stop trying to be understood, people who benefit from misunderstanding you, you stop performing, you stop explaining, you stop shrinking. I did not feel guilt, I felt alignment. My actions finally matched my truth. As the weeks passed, the noise faded. Online discussions moved on. Public attention shifted. But the consequences for my parents did not disappear. Trust once broken does not return easily. Relationships cooled. Invitations slowed. People remembered, and that memory became permanent. For Lily, the outcome was simple. She knew exactly who she was and who she was not. She was not a placeholder. She was not a disguise. She was not an accessory to someone else's story. She was herself, and she had been protected. That mattered more than anything. For me, the aftermath brought something unexpected. Peace. Not reconciliation, not forgiveness. Peace. Because when you tell the truth fully, there is nothing left to defend. Nothing left to hide. Nothing left to fear. I did not win. I did not lose. I concluded something that had been unfinished since I was 16. I closed a door that had remained open only because I had never locked it. My parents did not disappear from the world, but they disappeared from my life. Completely. And this time, the choice was mine. In the final part, I will tell you what I learned from all of this, what it means to define family on your own terms, and why sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away without looking back. Because the truth does not always bring reconciliation. Sometimes it brings release. After everything that happened, people often ask me the same question. Was it worth it? They asked it carefully, as if the answer might reveal something about who I was. I always took a moment before responding, not because I doubted myself, but because the answer was not simple. I did not do what I did to hurt my parents. I did not do it to embarrass them, and I did not do it to punish them. I did it because the truth belonged to me. For 20 years, my life had been shaped by a lie that benefited everyone except the people who paid the price for it, me and my daughter. Telling the truth was not an act of revenge. It was an act of ownership. I took back my story. When I was 16, I was taught that family was conditional, that love could be withdrawn, that belonging had rules. That lesson followed me for years. It showed up in how hard I worked, in how carefully I trusted, in how afraid I was of needing anyone. But raising Lily taught me something different. Family is not the people who share your blood. Family is the people who do not leave when things become inconvenient. Family is the people who stay when there is nothing to gain. My parents chose reputation over responsibility. They chose image over integrity. They chose silence over accountability. And those choices shaped everything that came after. But they did not get to define the rest of my life. Walking away that night was not dramatic. There was no final argument, no last word, just distance. And sometimes, distance is the healthiest boundary you can draw. I learned that forgiveness does not always mean reconciliation. You can forgive without reopening the door. You can release anger without inviting harm back into your life. And you can tell the truth without waiting for permission. Lily and I moved forward not because everything was resolved, but because everything was clear. Clarity is underrated. It does not feel exciting. It does not come with applause. But it gives you something far more valuable: peace. If you are watching this and parts of this story feel familiar, I want you to hear this. You are not required to protect people who did not protect you. You are not obligated to maintain narratives that erase your pain. And you are not wrong for choosing honesty over harmony. Silence is often praised as maturity, but silence can also be complicity. There is a difference. Speaking the truth does not make you cruel. It makes you free. This story was never about destroying a family. It was about refusing to be destroyed by one. It was about choosing self-respect over approval and choosing authenticity over acceptance. Some endings do not come with reconciliation. Some endings come with release, and release is enough. If this story resonated with you, if you have ever felt erased, overlooked, or asked to shrink to protect someone else's image, you are not alone. Your story matters, even if no one ever asked to hear it. Before this video ends, I want to ask you to do 3 things. If this story gave you clarity, please like this video. It helps this message reach people who might need it. If you have experienced something similar, or if this story made you reflect on your own boundaries, leave a comment below. Your words might help someone else feel less alone. And if you want to continue hearing stories about resilience, truth, and reclaiming identity, make sure you subscribe to the channel. More stories are coming. Not all of them end the same way, but all of them end honestly. Thank you for staying until the end. Thank you for listening. And remember this: you do not owe anyone your silence. You owe yourself the truth.